Welcome to this Vote 2016 KSAT 12 News and KSAT12.com special. I'm Steve Spriester. Today, it is one of the hotly contested races in the country. Congressional District House 23. Will Hurd is the incumbent. Pete Gallego is his challenger. And you can see what a huge district this is. Basically running from the outskirts of San Antonio down to the border and all the way to the outskirts of El Paso. A huge district, but 2 years ago, it was separated by only less than 2,500 votes between the two men that you are about to meet. Let's meet the candidates for this district. First, incumbent Will Hurd. Welcome, sir. And former Congressman Pete Gallego. Welcome.
Very good. Thank you.
When you talk about that margin, 2,400 votes, something like that. Pete, you're going to get the first question here. What separates you from Will Hurd?
Well, I think there's a completely different philosophy in terms of how we approach the issues. For me, growing up in West Texas, it's really important. People who live out there are independent by nature. They don't necessarily go for one political party or the other. They do the right thing for the right reasons. And for me as a member of Congress, that's essentially what my voting record was. I wanted to be a voice for the people. And so I voted with the Democrats when I thought they were right. I voted with the Republicans. If I thought they were right, I stood up to my own party when I thought they were wrong. And I think that's a huge difference between the two of us, because Mr. Hurd's voting record, as an example, is about 96 or 97% straight party. And he votes with the party even though the issue is something that impacts us here locally. For example, within 3 months of arriving, he voted to essentially privatize the Medicare system. He's had some votes that I think are not in line with that independent-minded spirit. And again, for me, it was just, it really is a different approach. I like to do the right thing for the right reason. It's what I teach my kid. I have to lead by example because kids learn and watch. And so, you know, frankly, I think that's a huge difference between the two of us.
Congressman Hurd.
Sure. Well, first, Steve, thanks for hosting us. Thanks to KSAT. I know KVIA is streaming this as well.
And Texas Tribune.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, this is an important issue. It's been a great week. We're seeing turnout all across the state, which is awesome. A lot of men and women have laid down their life in order to protect that right to vote, and it's awesome that people are using it. And it's pretty good, too, that the Spurs start off with a victory earlier this week. I'm from San Antonio, born and raised, went to John Marshall High School, and then on to Texas A&M, and I served my country for 9.5 years as an undercover officer in the CIA. One of the biggest differences between me and my opponent is my background and experience when it comes to national security. There is no one in Congress that has this background, and we're being able to leverage it on important issues of the day. I think the other issue that separates us is that we have a record of accomplishment. In his 2 years in office, he got absolutely nothing accomplished. I got 10 bills off the House floor. 5 of those were actually signed into law in bipartisan effort. You can't get anything signed by this president unless it's bipartisan. And that's being done in only 22 months. When he was in Congress, he got 0 bills off the House floor, 0 bills signed into law. We've been able to do things like fix problems that have been going on in this district. Let's take Laughlin Air Force Base in Del Rio. Produces more pilots than any facility in the United States of America. But if it rained more than an inch, the flight line got flooded, and it was like toys in a bathtub. All right? Now, my opponent will say he put language in an appropriations bill to identify the problem, but we were the ones that actually fixed it. And this is the kind of can-do attitude that I bring to Congress. And I'm not a career politician. I had experience not only in national security, in the back alleys of dangerous places, but I was in the private sector as well, too, helping businesses grow in markets they've never been in before. I helped start a cybersecurity company from scratch. And when you look at San Antonio being Cyber City USA, you know, understanding these issues, it's important for San Antonio. San Antonio is also Military City USA. El Paso has Fort Bliss. And then you have Del Rio, Laughlin Air Force Base. These are important issues. And another thing that I'll say, the difference between my opponent and I, again, he used a lot of words, and he wants to talk about Medicare. The reality is this. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats and my opponent, Pete Gallego, voted to remove $100 billion, that's what the B, out of Medicare to prop up Obamacare. That's money that goes to programs that my parents use. You know, my dad's 83, my mom's 72. They're in the best health of their life because of Medicare Advantage. And so saying that I was against that is just crazy because it's not true.
All right, let's move on. I'm glad you mentioned KVIA simulcasting this, Texas Tribune simulcasting this. Also, we're live streaming it on KSAT.com. We're getting Facebook questions as we go on as well, so I'll add some of those into the questions I already have. You talked about partisanship, both of you did. So let's get to the elephant and the donkey in the room here and talk a little bit about the presidential candidates for each party. You have been attacked by Mr. Gallego, the DCCC, some super PACs, tying you to Donald Trump. How do you answer those charges?
From day one, I never supported him, endorsed him. I said that until he had a real national security plan and can prove that he respected minorities and women, I would withhold that endorsement. And I've kept that, and I said that I will not be supporting him. You know, there's only one candidate in this race that's willing to stand up to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, right? And this is one of those examples. Again, my opponent hasn't, he's lockstep with Hillary Clinton and has said that since day one. And I'm willing to stand up against folks in my party to do what is right for this district. I'm an independent voice for the constituents of the 23rd District of Texas.
Are you worried what Donald Trump could mean for your candidacy?
No, because here's the reality. This race is about a contrast between me and my opponent. I don't believe in coattails. You know, I've worked over the last 22 months to develop an independent relationship with these folks. They know who I am, they know what we've been able to accomplish, and they know they've been seeing a level of service that they haven't gotten in a decade. I've done over 400 events in these 29 counties. It takes 10.5 hours to drive from one corner of this district to the other. I've crisscrossed it dozens of times. I've answered the mail, I answer email, I answer phone calls, and we deliver a level of service for these constituents, and that's what they appreciate. The reality is this: I don't care if you voted for me or not. If you're in a city that's been flooded and you need help to get access to FEMA grants, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to help you get those things. And that's what this district has seen, and they haven't seen that in over a decade.
Pete, how do you answer that? What do you think? I mean, you've been
Well,
very
I
vocal
will,
in tying him to Trump and very critical of him not distancing himself from Donald
Here's
Trump.
my reaction. Reminds me of the Longhorn rancher in West Texas who said of his Longhorns, there's a point here and a point here and a whole lot of bull in between. And that's my immediate reaction. Here, I will tell you why. First of all, for 15 months, Mr. Trump has been out there spewing hatred against Latinos, against veterans, and you never heard Mr. Hurd. In fact, I believe today there's an editorial in one of the local newspapers where Mr. Hurd indicated that one of the things that he appreciated about Mr. Trump was his national security plan. And suddenly, when the tape came out, suddenly Mr. Hurd followed the rest of the herd, some 40-something people. He wasn't even the first one. There was a whole series of people that jumped off the Trump train. And frankly, I believe that if that tape hadn't come out, Mr. Hurd would have continued saying absolutely nothing about Donald Trump. That's not leadership. That's followership. I'm gonna make up a word here. That's followership, and that's not what the district needs. For the people at home, I can tell Mr. Hurd has gone Washington when he claims to have success on the basis of parliamentary procedure. Because the truth is that if you ask Wayne here from San Antonio, who I helped get $25,000 from the VA that he was owed, he won't tell you that I was a do-nothing congressman. If you ask him in West Texas, who was the first congressman she'd ever contacted about helping somebody get a prosthetic device, and we did it, she won't tell you I was a do-nothing congressman. If you ask Leticia, whose son was having trouble with his immigration paperwork and we helped fix it, and for the first time in years she was able to bring her family together, she won't tell you I was a do-nothing congressman. I measure my success by the people that I am able to help, the difference that I'm able to make in a local community, not by any Washington standard. Frankly, the issues that Mr. Hurd has raised, with Laughlin as an example, I, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, put the riders and the necessary language into the committee reports and different things so that Laughlin would be taken care of. And in the final analysis, the wheels of government move slowly. And now Mr. Hurd got to cut the ribbon on Laughlin, as Mr. Hurd gets to claim credit for the VA reform with the choice card. But if he's standing tall, it's because he's standing on my shoulders. It's because he's standing on the work that I did.
Steve,
right.
I would like to respond to that. One of the most frustrating things about Washington, D.C. are career politicians that use a lot of words and don't get any action done, right? If I was so partisan, I would not have received the endorsement of the San Antonio Express-News and the El Paso newspaper, right? Nobody's going to confuse those two organizations with Fox News, right? And so, again, there's a record. And I love how career politicians want to talk about who gets to take the picture, right? And who was there for the groundbreaking and not about actually getting things done. And that's why this country is frustrated with career politicians. That's why 70% of this country thinks the country's on the wrong track, because we have people that want to talk a good game but haven't delivered back home.
All right, I want to stick to the Trump question, the Trump effect that some people have talked about. And Mr. Gallego, he has not endorsed Trump, never endorsed Trump. As a matter of fact, after the tape came out on the bus, if I'm correct, he said he should step out of the race. What more should he have done, in your opinion?
He had a choice of 17 presidential candidates, I believe, in the initial Republican primary, and he couldn't make up his mind to support one, not even the local one, not even Senator Cruz. He didn't make a choice. And then Mr. Trump becomes the nominee. He still doesn't make a choice. And it's amazing to me that he fancies himself an expert on national security. Well, the only real person under the Constitution who has ultimate responsibility as both commander-in-chief and as head of state for our foreign policy is the President of the United States. And if he's a national security expert, he's not willing to tell people whether or not he trusts Donald Trump to push the nuclear button. Mr. Trump, who has said that he wants to give nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia and to Korea and to these other places, and he won't even venture forth with an opinion. Finally, at the very end, Mr. Hurd finally says, after that tape comes out, where he's talking so horribly about women, that he's opposed to Mr. Trump. And frankly, that is 15 months too late. Where was he when Mr. Trump was talking about, we have POWs of World War II in San Antonio, I've met them. And when Mr. Trump said, I don't respect them, they were captured. You didn't hear Mr. Hurd stand up. Or all of the comments about women, or the one that hurt for my son to watch, and this is the first year that I don't even like for my son to watch the news at this point, because I'm afraid of what he's going to hear. But the conversation about a Latino who was born in the United States, in Indiana, whose parents were immigrants, the American dream.
Judge Curiel.
And Mr. Trump says he's not qualified to sit on a case that he's a party in because he's Mexican. And that's the exact phrase that he used. He's Mexican. And Mr. Hurd, not a word.
What do you say to that?
Well, first off, Steve, this is one reason why Pete got fired 2 years ago, because he doesn't understand how this country operates. A Congress is an equal branch of government, and we have a role in foreign policy and national security, right? The only reason that Pete keeps talking about Donald Trump is it's a distraction from the fact that he got absolutely nothing accomplished when he was in Washington, D.C. Let's talk about his ideas on how are you going to fight ISIS and prevent them from inspiring people in our homes like what happened in Orlando. What is he going to do with bringing some kind of stability in Iraq? How is he going to stand up against Vladimir Putin? Because here's the reality, Steve. The Russians attacked the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. This is an organization that is spending over $3 million to unseat me. An attack on them is an attack on all of us. What are we going to do to stop that? What is he going to do to deal with North Korea? These are some of the issues when I crisscross the district that people want to talk about. They want to talk about border security. How are we going to focus on the 19 criminal organizations that are operating in Mexico? And while I'm talking about these issues, all he wants to do is have a distraction and talk about something else.
But to the point he made, did you wait too long to speak out on Donald Trump?
I've never endorsed the guy, and I'm not going to. So I've done it from day one.
We talked about the elephant and the donkey in the room, and I joked with both of you before we started. We're going to put, Pete on the left of me and Will on the right of me, and you guys can fight for the middle. Pete, let's talk about Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi. Their ads are tying you very closely with the two of them, and they're calling you Repeat Gallego, whether fairly or not, painting you as a liberal. Clearly, in your first statement that we heard tonight, you're trying to not use that label. You're independent, is what I heard you say earlier. How do you answer the charges that you're tied to Pelosi and Clinton?
Look, no one has ever run against me by saying nice things about me. It's just unheard of. So I expect all of those kinds of charges to be made. But if you look at what happened in Washington, if you look at the fact that I had about a 75% score, partisan scoring, so that means that about 3 out of every 4 times I voted with the Democrats, I voted on issues that were good for West Texas. But if it wasn't good for Texas 23rd District, then I voted no. And I voted with the Republicans to reopen the government, for example. I voted with the Republicans when I thought they were right. One of the challenges that Mr. Hurd has gotten caught up in is this whole partisan system. We continue to elect people who go add fuel to the fire, and that's Mr. Hurd. You can tell that by his 96 or 97% straight Republican voting record. I don't agree. I think most of us don't agree with our spouses 96 or 97% of the time. So if you're agreeing with somebody 96 or 97% of the time, then clearly you're just following along. And there are issues, for example, closing the Amtrak train that runs through San Antonio, stops in Del Rio, Alpine, and El Paso, closing that down. The issues with Big Bend National Park, for example, and putting forward operating bases for border security inside the canyons of the Big Bend. All of those issues are not in line with the 23rd District, but you know what? They were the partisan thing to do, and so Mr. Hurd did them. And frankly, I think we have too much partisanship and not enough patriotism.
How do you answer that, Congressman? I mean, when you look at your voting record, is he correct with the 97% figure?
This is a career politician using some website that calculates something. The Republican Party is in power, and we have a lot more votes. But when you look at what I've actually done, the bills that I've gotten passed out of the House floor and signed into law, it all has a bipartisan sponsorship. One that I'm proud of was a bill that modernizing our government's technology. This was one of the original co-sponsors, was Steny Hoyer. He's the #2 guy in the Democratic Party in the House. This was a bill we got off the House floor working together a week before the recess to come down for elections. That's the kind of activity that I have. When you have people in Washington, Democrats that thank you on the House floor for working together to get bills done, that's the real test about whether you're partisan or not. And again, now Pete likes to talk about his bipartisanship. Where is the Republicans, from his time in office that talks about, how great it was working with him? If he was so bipartisan, why couldn't he move any bills through Congress that had a positive impact on our district? So again, I think this is the problem with career politicians, is that they're looking at the wrong metrics and not looking at how do you actually bring change and impact our district.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but to pop in here, you can tell he's gone to Washington because he didn't answer your question. The thing that you asked was, do you have a 96 or 97% straight voting record? And what he immediately did is change the subject. Oh, well, let's use another metric. Let's talk about X or Y or Z. He has a 96 or 97% straight voting record because he votes with his party. He follows the leader. and that's all that he does. And in, you know, the frustration for those of us who live in the district is that we don't feel we have a voice. Tim Hulskamp, who was the leader of the Freedom Caucus in D.C., Mr. Hurd's voting record is further to the right than some of those guys. And frankly, this is a district that is 50-50. You would think that the person who represents us would be a moderate who would be in the middle. But that's not what we get from Mr. Hurd. We get a right, far to the right voting record that's not in line with the district. And you can tell that if he doesn't answer the question, it's he didn't like it, and there you go.
Well, he didn't. I don't think he necessarily agreed with it. That fact is it?
No. Again, what website? What score?
Try Congressional Quarterly.
You
try,
know,
try,
so
try
yeah, do I vote with the party? Yeah, but you know who's going to decide, Steve? In about 12 days, the voters of this district are going to decide who has proven that they've represented this district better, and I feel pretty good about that.
Let's hear from some of the constituents. We're on Facebook Live, live streaming this on KSAT.com. A lot of the questions for both of you are simple. Trump was a popular one. Another one is the veterans. A lot of attacks back and forth against both of you, veterans attacking each one of you. How do you answer those charges? I'll start with you, Mr. Hurd.
Sure.
Specifically, that you cut veterans' benefits. Right. What would you? Is that true? And what would you do for the veterans that are in your district?
No, it's not true that we cut benefits of veterans. We passed one of the largest appropriations bill for the VA, the Veterans Affairs Department, in the history of the VA department. And so I'm proud of that. You know, when I was in the CIA, I served alongside the men and women in our military. You know, I know the sacrifices they make. I know the sacrifice that their families make. And that's why, you know, I'm working hard to work on this, what's called the Choice Program. This is if your appointment to go see the VA is more than 30 days, or if you're more than 40 miles away, which impacts so many of our constituents in this district, they can go on and use a local health care provider. This is a good program. It's not fixing all the problems, but we're trying to help expand it. We're even doing things where we have a pilot program going on in Del Rio, where if you have to do something simple like get blood drawn or do a basic test, you can do it locally and not have to do a 6 or 7 or 8 hour round trip to go do something that basic. These are the programs that we're working on to make sure that we have providing the service to the veterans. I have someone on my staff who is a Purple Heart recipient, who is one of the folks that are helping to drive to make sure we're providing the right kind of care to our veterans. Because the reality is this, Steve, it's 2016. A veteran shouldn't have to call their congressman or woman to get the access to the benefits that they need. You know, but the problem is they have to, and that's why we're there. And our philosophy is simple. If you have a problem, come talk to us, and we'll try to work it out. Because if one person's having a problem, then thousands of people are having that problem, and we have to figure out how to do it on a macro fix.
Mr. Gallego, a lot of people have attacked you of basically doing nothing when the VA crisis hit, when veterans were being hurt or not served at all in some of the VA hospitals.
Well, let me tell you about when Mr. Hurd talks about his reality, I think he lives in an alternate reality. If you look at the congressional debates about the choice card, I led the floor fights. I'm the guy from West Texas who had to go more, you know, for someone to go from Alpine to San Antonio is over 300 miles. To go to Big Spring is is about the same. To go to El Paso is 200 miles. The first thing that I did as a member of Congress was file a bill that became a pilot program to help veterans get to their nearest VA facility. The idea that if you were more than 40 miles away, I pushed for, because it helped us build our local healthcare system, so that if you were in the hospital in Alpine or whatever, you could go there locally and do your tests and do those kinds of things, because it helps stabilize the issue of rural healthcare, which is a huge issue across the 23rd district. If you talk to veterans, you know, I spent the other day in Eagle Pass, and people who are frustrated because they call Mr. Hurd's office and they call Mr. Hurd's office and they don't get results. That was very different for me. I hired a staff that not only included veterans, but also included social workers, so that we could do everything that we could to help those veterans get the health care, not only the health care that they need, but the health care that they deserve and that they've earned.
Let's wade through some of these charges that have been lobbied back and forth. There's been a lot of them, a lot of money going into this race. I mean, it is the second most expensive House race in the history of Texas. It'll probably end up being. Did you cut student loans, Congressman Hurd?
No.
That's another charge that's out there. Are you in favor of building a wall? That's
No,
that's another one that's out there.
The student loan thing, this is what's funny about that. We're actually working with the Department of Education to expand the Pell Grant program into to summers, because right now you can only use it in the fall and the spring, but there's a lot of non-traditional students that need access to those Pell Grants in the summer. We're working to do that. I'm working on making sure you can use Pell Grants for dual credit in high school. That means when you're going to high school and you're getting your high school credit, you can also get your college credit. That's one way that we're going to significantly drive down the cost of going to university or going to school. So education is an important issue. We have income inequality because we have education inequality, and this is something that is near and dear to my heart. The wall. Since 2013, I've been talking about how building a wall from sea to shining sea is the most expensive and least effective way to do border security. Right? I know a little something about this because, you know, in my previous life, I chased terrorists all around the world. The reality is this: we need to be focusing on the 19 criminal organizations that are operating in Mexico. We should be doing more with working with our Mexican partners to focus on those entities that are there. We need to have intelligence-led border security. The other thing, when we talk about border security, we have to talk about international trade, because trade is the lifeblood for this part of Texas. Mexico is Texas's #1 trading partner. Right? These communities along the border are not two communities. It's one community separated by an international boundary. Right? Trade is the lifeblood to these communities, and we need to be increasing trade. That's why I support free trade. My opponent does not. NAFTA was signed right here in San Antonio, Texas. We should be talking about being partners in energy with Mexico, because this is a great opportunity for us to be selling energy to Eastern Europe and all places. So these are some of the issues that I've been talking about since I've been running in Congress.
So you're in favor of NAFTA?
Yes.
Stark opposition to Donald Trump calling it one of the worst trade deals he's ever seen in his life.
That's correct. That's what he said, I believe.
Yeah, you don't agree with that?
I don't agree with that.
All right. You in favor of NAFTA?
I thought that NAFTA, we've learned a lot of lessons since about how to make that agreement better. It certainly helped a lot of the industries in Texas. But now, I mean, we know so much more. The first time that you do things is always a harder time. But let me go back for a second, if I may, about the two questions that you asked. One was the issue of the wall, and the other was
student loans.
Student loans. It was interesting that the San Antonio Current had an article about Mr. Hurd, who asked a constituent to explain to him about the Zika stuff, because he voted to block the Zika funding about 9 times, I believe. But it's interesting to me that we have the same issue again, because when Mr. Hurd voted on a budget, now a budget is a moral document. My dad used to say, you know, you can talk to me about what's important to you, but show me how you spend your money. Because how you spend your money, that will tell me what's really important to you. If you look at the budget proposal that Mr. Hurd voted for, it cut Pell Grants. It cut Pell Grants, and that's the budget that he voted for. It was $1.9 billion below what the VA said that they needed just to do their jobs. And that's exactly what we want. I would like for the VA to be able to do their jobs. If you just listen to Mr. Hurd on the border wall, he talks about a wall from sea to shining sea. Well, we don't have any territory on the Pacific Ocean, and we don't have any territory on the Atlantic Ocean. We're talking about the 23rd District of Texas. And he said, in his own words, that a wall was appropriate under certain circumstances. It was a tool. And then he says it's appropriate in highly populated areas. Those are his words, not mine. And when he talks about that, what is a highly populated area? Because for some of us, my hometown is 6,000 people. Del Rio is they have traffic lights, right? I mean, they're like a highly populated area to me. Does that mean that he wants to finish the wall in Del Rio? Because it's not on a sea. We're not talking about, Florida and California. We're talking about, so he himself, when he talks about, we don't have seas here. I want to know about the 23rd District. And that's not something that he's talked about. He talks about it in those bigger phrases. And again, you can tell he's gone Washington because he's leaving himself room to maneuver.
Well, let's allow him to clarify.
Sure.
Are you in favor of a border wall in District 23?
A border wall is indeed a tool that should be used in certain places. And that should be left up to the folks on the ground to decide. And this is the problem with the Department of Homeland Security that oversees Border Patrol. They try to have a one-size-fits-all solution all across the border. What you need in San Diego is different than what you need in El Paso, is different than what you need in Presidio, is different than what you need in Del Rio. And so you have to let the folks on the ground adjust their tactics, techniques, and procedures as they see fit. And so in certain places, it does make sense. In others, it doesn't. And so, you have to go, foot by foot and make those decisions.
In other words, he's not against the wall.
Let's talk about some of the charges that have been levied against you.
Sure.
The biggest one, I mean, we've already talked about you being anti-veteran. You say that's not true. How about that you're the Washington insider and that you're a lobbyist? And I've seen the revolving door commercial.
Sure.
How do you answer
I love
that?
those. It's not true. I mean,
you're not a lobbyist.
Since I left office, that's actually independently, an independent group has indicated, has already, if you look at a PolitiFact, they found that to be false. But here, I'll tell you where I've spent my time. I have thoroughly enjoyed teaching. I've taught at Sul Ross State University, my alma mater, my hometown of Alpine, and I've taught at Trinity University here in San Antonio. It was a phenomenal experience. It really completely renewed my faith in America and the people that are coming up, the leaders of tomorrow. Trinity, the kids were just phenomenal. They were brilliant, they were participatory, they did all of their work. It was such a great experience. And at Sul Ross, it was the same thing. It was, I taught a freshman level. I'd usually taught kids who were upper division, and I taught a freshman level government class. And so for the first time, I had people in my class who didn't really want to be there, right, because it was a requirement. And frankly, a lot of the kids, I thought, well, I was teaching a lot of the Sul Ross football team. And I thought, this is going to be an interesting time. And you know what? It's been one of the single best experiences I've ever had, because teaching about government and how government should work and what we should be doing and how those have been, it's really rejuvenated me. And I feel so much better about the future of our country as a result.
Congressman, he says he's not a lobbyist.
Right.
That he hasn't been, going through the revolving door of DC.
He's gotten a six-figure contract from the city of Austin, and who he reported to was their head lobbyist. He's worked for other cities as well for pay, and in the minutes of several city council meetings, it talks about how Pete Gallego is going to help us get this bill passed. He had been seen in the halls of the Capitol during session. And so if that's not lobbying, I don't know what is. And the question is, he has said at times that he hasn't filed with the Texas Ethics Commission to be a lobbyist. Well, the question is, why hasn't he? Because if he's advocating for pieces of legislation, that's lobbying. I don't know what else to call it.
All right. I want to talk about accomplishments now. But Congressman Hurd, what is your single thing that you're most proudest of as an accomplishment legislatively in Washington, D.C.?
Steve, I appreciate the question, and we had several, so I'm glad I have more than one to pick from. The reality is, I think our first one was pretty awesome. You know, this was a Department of Homeland Security, in their infinite wisdom, was going to change how Border Patrol was getting paid, and they were going to receive $700 to $1,000 less a pay period. Right? That is crazy. And so we were able to work in a bipartisan fashion to get that passed. The House, the Senate, and get signed into law. And we made sure the men and women that are protecting us have their pay. One other thing that was important here in San Antonio, right? The federal courthouse, working side by side with Democrats like Henry Cuellar to get that done. The mission reach, you know, such an important part of our landscape here in San Antonio, making sure the county was getting reimbursed. They'd been waiting for almost a decade to get, you know, almost $60 million. We got that process going where they're now getting reimbursed. Again, in a bipartisan manner with some of the fellow San Antonian congressmen and women. So those are some of the things that I'm proud of. And the reality is too, Steve, a lot of time people don't see this. We talk about legislation, but when you're able to help the life of that person that needs help battling the bureaucracy, that's awesome. That's worth putting up with the circus of Washington, D.C. Woman called her office, 76 years old. She'd lost her husband the year before, and he was a veteran, and she was supposed to be continuing to get veterans benefits. And being able to help her and get that for her, that's awesome. And so those are the victories that we have every day, and providing that level of service for the residents of the 23rd District of Texas is amazing, and that's why I hope I get honored with getting reelected.
Mr. Gallego, when you were in Congress 2 years ago, what were some of your proudest accomplishments?
Mine are all relative to people. I loved working for constituents and working on behalf of constituents. We brought back over $3 million that the federal government owed to veterans through the VA, to people who had overpaid the IRS or were having difficulties, different things. For me, the single most fun part of the job wasn't DC related. My efforts were to help people at home. And now as I walk door to door, I meet those people again and they say, oh yes, you helped me do X, or you helped me do Y. My office door had a sign that said, this office belongs to the people of the 23rd District. And I really genuinely believe that to be true. I will also tell you that in terms of the legislative accomplishments, I'm very proud of my work to make the VA better. It has to get better. I mean, you all ran a story very recently about how veterans were still standing in line outside of the VA in the heat. And I noticed that Mr. Hurd doesn't talk about that. I want to do those kinds of things that help make a difference for people. If I get the opportunity to serve in Congress again, I'll tell you about the two things that I want to work on. First thing, Bobby Barrera, who I met years ago in Del Rio, who's the former president of the National Disabled Vets, talks to me about the Caregivers Act and the idea that post-September 11, a family caregiver can be paid for giving care to someone who has been wounded in the service of our country. But pre-9/11, that doesn't happen. So for those Vietnam vets out there, I want to help them. The other issue for me that's a huge deal, Cheryl Langford, who was in Mr. Hurd's commercial, but actually is someone who has endorsed me and supports me. She showed up, she was invited to a town hall meeting and she ended up in a commercial like some of the other city employees from San Antonio. But Cheryl will talk to you about, you know, recently the Congress gave a tax exemption to Olympic medal winners. And it's not that I have an objection to Olympic medal winners, but do you know that they won't give the same exemption to what's called the widow's tax? So that if you're the spouse of a person who has lost their life in the line of duty, they have to pay taxes on that pension. And you know, over half of the Congress has signed on to that legislation. Mr. Hurd has not, and they've talked to him about signing on to that bill and he's not added his name. For me, those two things, that and frankly, working on a tax system, because when a billionaire like Donald Trump says he hasn't paid taxes in 18 years, there's clearly a problem with that system, and that's the system that Mr. Hurd has, and his party fight to defend. Those are the kinds of things that I want to work on, that I want to fix.
I want to talk about some of the Facebook questions that we've been getting. Matt sends a question specifically for you, Mr. Gallego.
Sure.
He wants to know why you continue to support Obamacare with skyrocketing premiums. We just saw the premiums go up the other day.
I will tell you, I've said from the beginning that Obamacare isn't a perfect system. The goal is that every family should have a family doctor. There are certain things about Obamacare that I think are important to keep. Now, Mr. Hurd would have you throw the whole thing away. But if you throw the whole thing away, by the way, he doesn't have anything to replace it with. He just wants to throw it away. But if you throw it away, you go back to an old system where you had these things called pre-existing conditions. And I bet everybody watching knows someone who has had cancer or diabetes or something else. And they couldn't get health insurance because they had that pre-existing condition. Well, pre-existing conditions are now against the law. If you were female, your premiums were higher, and sometimes you would be refused coverage because theoretically the law said that you could discriminate against women. You cannot do that anymore. You charge men and women the same amount. And for me as a parent, it's important that as my kid gets older, I can keep him on health insurance until he's 26 years old. Those are examples of things that I'd like to keep. Now, there are some things that I would like to change about that. I would like to, for example, expand the small business tax credit so that you can put more people into the system, so that you would have, right now, it's a small business is defined as 25, less than 25 employees. Let's make it 50. Let's put more people in so that we drive the cost down. There's things that we can do to make it better, but I wouldn't throw the whole thing away, because then you'd go back to pre-existing conditions, you'd go back to women paying more for health care, and you'd go back to sending your kid off to college without health insurance.
What do you do about the premiums?
The premiums, I think you would have to tell people, polls show that most people don't know that they are eligible for federal subsidies to help pay for their insurance. So first of all, we'd make sure that we would inform people that they have other options. And number two, you would drive down the cost of healthcare. One of the things for me that would be important to do is, having grown up on the border, you can go next door to Acuña or Piedras Negras, and you can buy your prescription drugs so much cheaper than the US. And even though the government provides a lot of drugs, the government can't get the volume discount that a Walmart or a Costco can, because there's a law that was passed by the Republican Congress that says the government can't ask for the best deal. That's crazy. Those are the kinds of things that we need to work on so that the government can get a volume discount, so that you can lower the cost of health care, so that you can make a difference. The other thing is, if you raise the minimum wage and people are making more, that's also important to me, because you've got to put more money out there. You've got to help people earn living wages.
Congressman Hurd, what do you say about the skyrocketing premiums with Obamacare? Are you in favor of getting rid of Obamacare?
Absolutely in favor of getting rid of Obamacare. And Matt, thanks for the question. The reality is this is one of those areas where there's great contrast between me and my opponent. This is actually one of the reasons why he got fired 2 years ago. Every opportunity he had when he was in Congress, he voted to ensure that the largest tax increase on the American people stayed the law of the land. Every time I was in office, I voted to get rid of it. Now, we do have a plan on how to replace this. And this plan actually includes some of the things that people are using now, like pre-existing conditions, like letting kids stay on their parents' insurance until they're 25. But the way you get at the premium issue is you got to drive competition. Having federal subsidies is not going to make this problem better. It's going to make it worse. So that's why you have to have real competition, so that, and we also want to make sure the families are the ones making the decision not about their health care, not bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., because it's your viewers that know best on how to deal with their health care. And the other thing we need to do is make sure we're not taking money out of Medicare to prop up Obamacare. Again, something that my opponent continued to support, and making sure Medicare is there for our seniors is vitally important. And there's another thing that we've dealt with when it comes to healthcare, are community health clinics. There are dozens of community health clinics throughout the 23rd District of Texas. They serve hundreds of thousands of people. Their budgets we're going to get cut by 76%. Only Washington, D.C. thinks that's okay. We stopped that from happening this year. Bipartisan legislation that passed the House and the Senate got signed into law. And I was honored to be recognized by the community health clinics, beginning an award for being a champion for them. I'm the only member in Texas, Republican or Democrat, that got that award because this is an important issue for our families and for our kids.
I saw you smirk over there.
Well,
so I'm
no, I'm not smirking. I am. Again, where you stand, I think, depends on where you sit. This idea that you give people their own opportunities, it depends on what that means. I like making my own choices. I think most people like making their own choices. But you know what? My mom is 88, and she relies on Medicare. And when you turn Medicare into that voucher system that Mr. Hurd has worked for, you give my mom a voucher, an 88-year-old woman, and you tell her to go find her own health care. And you tell her to go figure out where she can get her best deal. As a practical matter, it may sound like great rhetoric. It may sound like great stuff, but you know what? I'm not interested in the rhetoric. I'm interested in how it works on the ground, the practical aspects of what you're doing. I, as a member of Congress, voted to improve the system every opportunity that I had. Now, the idea that you would repeal it, here's the issue. The Republicans probably 60, 70 times voted to repeal Obamacare. Even Mr. Hurd would agree that for a bill to pass repealing Obamacare, it has to pass the House, it has to pass the Senate, and it has to be signed by the President. And remind me, what is the President's last name? And is he going to sign a bill that repeals his signature legacy? No. So instead of spending your time repealing something that's not going to get repealed, can we at least fix it in the meantime? Maybe next time with a new president that will be different, but in the meantime, let's fix. Mr. Hurd is part of that obstruction in Washington that people despise. He's part of that partisanship in DC that people hate. And let's just fix things and move forward. And that was my attitude, and that was my voting record. And frankly, I think you know, that is something that I'm very proud of.
I quickly want to get to another Facebook question. This one is for you, sure. Congressman Hurd. It's from Jesse Villarreal. He wants to know how you feel about not letting a sitting president appoint a new justice to the Supreme Court, specifically talking about President sure. Obama and Justice Garland.
Well, in Congress and in the House of Representatives, we have no say in that effort. That's something that the Senate confirms. The president gets to nominate and the Senate confirms. That's an issue that they'll have to deal with. I think it's important that we have a functioning government in all branches, and this is something that the Senate is going to have to make decisions on.
If you were in the Senate, would you have given the president a yay or nay on his nominee?
If I was in the Senate, which I'm not, I would have voted against the gentleman that he nominated.
But you would have given him a vote?
Probably not. Like I said, it's hard to make decisions on philosophical issues when you're not in that place. So I don't know all the background around what was going on at the time, but I think Merrick is not the kind of person that I would like to see on the Supreme Court.
What a great Washington answer. It's somebody else's problem, it's somebody else's responsibility. That's the Senate. They have the single largest Republican majority in the U.S. House since Herbert Hoover was president. They also control the U.S. Senate, both sides of the Congress. You would think that as one party they would talk to each other, they would work together. And when Mr. Hurd says probably not, I wouldn't vote on it either, he's right. And he's right because all he does is follow the leader. If the majority leader says jump, Mr. Hurd will ask how high. That's what's wrong with Washington. There's too much partisanship. You know, I don't think anybody I don't teach my kid, I don't think anybody teaches their kid about Democrats and Republicans. We teach our kids about right and wrong. So who cares what the leader is doing if the leader is wrong? You stand up for the right thing. And you say, I want to make my government work again. And I think it's wrong that we block the constitutional power of any president perpetually. Now they're talking about if Secretary Clinton becomes president, they'll block it forever. They won't even give her an appointment. How horrible is that? In this democratic system that has worked for over 200 years, the president gets to nominate a cabinet, he gets to nominate federal judges, he gets to nominate justices of the Supreme Court, and to say, you know what, I'm unhappy because I didn't win and I'm not going to cooperate with you at all. That's the kind of obstruction that people are so tired of. And that's exactly what he just gave you, obstruction. I would do it, sure, I would do it. That's crazy.
What do you say to that?
Well, a career politician that talks about everything else other than what his job is. He hasn't talked about, why he couldn't get anything accomplished when he was in Washington, D.C. He hasn't talked about national security issues that people around this district are talking about. He wants to talk about distractions that have absolutely nothing to do with the job of being the representative from the 23rd District of Texas. So, and part of that is because he is a career politician and he doesn't know. And that's why he was fired 2 years ago.
What is the biggest issue facing District 23, in your opinion?
National security. People are concerned that whether they can walk into a mall or their grocery store and get blown up by a terrorist. They're concerned about a porous border. And they are worried about the future security of their children. They're worried that ISIS is inspiring kids even if they're 7,000 miles away. When I was chasing Al-Qaeda in places like Pakistan, Afghanistan, they would do something called night letters. They would write a letter and put it on someone's doorstep. ISIS is leveraging social media to inspire people all around the world, and we're not doing enough to counter that, right? In one of the debates I was in Congress this year was with a Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee. Department of Homeland Security is not using the public testimonials of folks that went to Syria to fight with ISIS in their counter propaganda. And we were trying to pass a bill that said DHS use this. This is kind of like the old scared straight when we were in kids, in elementary school. Why were the Democrats fighting against using that, which is an important tool, in order to counter this messaging, in order to keep our country safe?
Mr. Gallego, what do you think is the biggest issue facing District 23?
It's actually economic security. Economic security because people are worried about their continued ability to put food on the table. People are worried about their continued ability to get their kids through college. This American dream that we've all been part of, right now, this is the first generation of Texans and Americans who will leave their country and their state worse off than our fathers and our grandfathers and our mothers and our grandmothers left it to us. And what a horrible legacy that is. For me, it's important to help small business because throughout the 23rd District, that's really what you have. You have mom and pop stores. My family ran a restaurant for 80 years. I grew up, as everyone knows, I grew up washing dishes and waiting on tables. I didn't cook because my dad actually wanted people to come back to the restaurant. So, those are the kinds of things that people are worried about. And those are the kinds of things that we have to work on. When a janitor at a school that I visited the other day, when he tells me that he pays more than he can afford in taxes and Donald Trump doesn't, how do you respond to that? I think that says horrible things about where the Congress is, because it's the Congress that writes the IRS code. It's the Congress that does that.
Give me, I like this question so much from one of the presidential debates that I want to ask you to in what's been a heated campaign. And I'll start with you, Mr. Gallego. Tell me one thing that you admire, about Congressman Hurd.
Congressman Hurd doesn't remember when he and I first met. I would be willing to bet money. I was a member of the leadership in the legislature, and we made a trip to A&M shortly after they'd had a really horrible tragedy.
The bonfire tragedy?
The bonfire. And Mr. Hurd was the leader of the student body at that time. And he handled that with grace, and he handled that with dignity. And I came away from that, despite the fact that my blood is somewhat burnt orange and a little bit of red for Saul Ross, I came away with a really good feeling about the things that were going on at A&M and how they were handling that tragedy.
All right. Congressman Hurd.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gallego. Look, there's no question that Pete's a great dad. You look at his son, you know, Nicolas has, what, 11 years old. He really is turning into a fine young man, and you can attribute that to his mother as well. But Pete is definitely a good father.
All right, we got time for the closing statements here. 2 minutes for each of you. Mr. Gallego, you get to go first.
Sure, I grew up in the 23rd District. I think it's an incredibly special place. I think it has the most wonderful people, the most incredible history, some phenomenal historic sites, the Devil's River, the Big Bend, the Guadalupe Mountains, all of which, for me, it's important to preserve that legacy for our kids, to take care, to make sure that we have an opportunity to expand our options. I was one of the biggest proponents for solar power and wind power because it helped generate jobs in the part of Texas, especially where we go through the ebbs and flows of the oil and gas energy, some effort to stabilize the economy, an effort to help people educate their kids and helping bring education closer to home so that people didn't have, when I started, there wasn't a university, for example, in Del Rio or Eagle Pass. There wasn't a university presence there. Those things have changed. I love the fact, because I was raised, my parents, when the bank in Alpine wouldn't loan money to Latinos, in those days we were all Mexican, they weren't Latinos, but my parents started a credit union with some other people that was run off of my family's dining room table. I saw that example, I saw that public service, and for me, putting water and sewer in colonias where it hadn't been there before, paving streets, helping people in their everyday lives, that's what's important to me. That's what I focus on, and that's why I know that ultimately that triumphs over a lot of the other bigger special interests and money and all of those kinds of things. I think people are the most important thing.
Thank you, Mr. Gallego. Congressman Hurd.
Steve, a couple of weeks ago, I had talked with a kid. He was in 5th grade. His name's Joshua, and his mom had contacted us. He was the 4th grade class president. He was class president in 4th grade and 5th grade. Right? And they contacted us because he had heard me speak in 4th grade, and it caused him to want to run, which was really cool. It's great when you get feedback like that. And I was talking to Joshua, I was like, man, you know, I'm in a tough re-election just like you. Do you have any guidance for me? Right? And the little kid, you know, you could hear his mind spinning, right? He goes, Congressman Hurd, you know why I got re-elected? Because I was nice to people, right? It's like, it's great advice. And that's the behavior, that's the mentality I've tried to take in this district. I'm going to help you regardless of whether you voted for me or not. Right? I've had the honor to take an oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution twice in my life. First time when I was in back alleys and dangerous places in the CIA. The second time is in this job. I am just getting started. I am not going to quit, and I'm going to continue to fight and do what is right for the 23rd Congressional District of Texas. And it's going to be an honor to go back to Washington, D.C. to fight on behalf of these amazing 29 counties.
Will Hurd, Pete Gallego, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
I'm glad it worked out, and I'm glad that people around the state are getting to see this debate between the two candidates.
Thank you so much for both of you for changing your schedule a little bit. I was a little worried when my son told me, because of my emergency eye surgery, that I would be a good pirate. So I appreciate the extra week to recuperate. Thank you.
We're just the conduit. I would give credit to Will Hurd's campaign on that for making.
Thank you both.
We want you to get better.
Thank you both.
To get better. Thanks, Steve.
I'm also excited about the turnout numbers that we have seen for early voting. I urge everyone, the most important decision that you're going to make this year is to vote. And I think both these gentlemen would say that's the most important thing to do in all of this. Cast your vote, let your voice be heard. If not in early voting, then on November 8th. For all of us here at KSAT 12 News and KSAT.com, thank you for joining us for this congressional debate. Have a great day.